Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a long time coming. I have to tell you that I sat behind a stage and I listened to somebody command an audience in Nashville, Tennessee. And he was commanding an audience by truth with a capital T. He was talking about something called Enneagram, something that I had been obsessed with for years. And all of a sudden, I heard somebody captivate an audience, keep people interested, and really offer an understanding of who people are and then how they behave in the world and how they behave on teams. It was absolutely fascinating. I waited a long time to get Ian on the show. I am so happy you're here, Ian. Thank you for joining us on the Jasmine Star Show.
Man, this is going to be really fun.
I hope so too. So we're going to hit the ground running. Now I have to tell you that when I chatted with my team a couple weeks ago, we were all talking about Enneagram. About half of the team was familiar with Enneagram, and the other half had never heard of it. So, if we take that very scientific approach, I'm going to assume that half of our listeners at this moment know about Enneagram and the other half don't. So, what's the nutshell version? What's the most that we can learn in a short amount of time to really help contextualize this conversation? And then we'll encourage people to dive deeper with Enneagram. But can you explain what that nutshell version is for
Sure.
us?
So the Enneagram is this wonderful ancient personality typing system. It teaches that there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the new world of relationships. It very importantly, the Enneagram teaches us that each of these types has an unconscious motivation that powerfully influences how they habitually and predictably act, think, and feel from moment to moment.
Mm, okay. Speaking of how people think and feel from moment to moment, I have to say that I follow you on Instagram, and I don't know who was sitting with you as you were driving, and somebody was in the passenger seat, and they decided to just have fun on Instagram stories. And then they asked you, okay, if I was an Enneagram 1, what would I eat for lunch? And then each subsequent story was going through one of the 9 Enneagrams. And my husband is an Enneagram 2. And when you got to 2, which is right at the beginning, I was cackling and I sent that story to my husband. And I said, you would eat shepherd's pie. You would eat something comforting. And then you got to an Enneagram 3, and you had said, and to which I'll never forget, you said that you would probably ask your assistant to go and get you lunch. And I was laughing. And my husband said, not only would you want an assistant to get you lunch, you would also beg the assistant to eat the lunch for you and hope that you
Yes.
feel full. And I was like, that's me. And Ian, lastly, I have a twin sister and she's an Enneagram 7. And they would just want to eat something fun, something lively, something celebratory. And I said, "My goodness, he is so good at what he do at what you do that you can predict what somebody might eat and feel very very satisfied with." Now, I just thought that that's showcasing a person in their place of power, their knowing, and their way to contextualize things in the world. So, how did you get involved with Enneagram in the first place? Because I think that's going to set the tone for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I was in graduate school studying to become a psychotherapist. And I took a weekend off and went up to a retreat center in the mountains of Colorado. And I happened upon a book about the Enneagram. And I remember I'd been in grad school already for a year. And I remember thinking, where on earth has this tool been? Like, why hasn't anyone spoken to us about this? Because it was such a accessible, actionable treatment and exploration of how people show up for life, right? And what I also realized at that moment was that when clients came to see me, that it probably would save me about a year of having to figure out what was happening in their inner terrain. Right now, the Enneagram isn't perfect. It's not a replacement for pharmaceuticals if you're depressed or anxious. It's not any of that stuff, but it gives us a powerful, low resolution picture of what the internal inner workings of the human personality for these 9 types is like. And I just find it compared to Hogan and Colby and Disc and Myers Briggs, all of which I love. They have a place. But I find it to be far more applicable in my work with corporate clients, which is the majority of my work. I don't have a therapeutic practice anymore, but as a counselor, I'm naturally gravitate toward it with everybody, and I've just never come across something as fundamentally useful for people to develop self awareness and self knowledge.
So Ian referenced a book that he discovered in his path about Enneagram, and I have to take a second here and probably give a shout out, a shameless plug, because the road back to you, an Enneagram journey to self discovery, was what really opened my eyes to understanding how deep knowing you have of this subject matter. Now, Ian and I are chatting here, and if you're listening and you're still unsure what Enneagram really means to you, what he said is a very simple picture of understanding who you are. Now, when I start working with people, if they happen to know their Enneagram and they tell me they're a 7, they tell me they're a 4, I immediately, no, it's not a piece of judgment, it's a place of understanding that every number has a dark side and a light side. Now, I know that I am a 3 wing 4. And this enables me, and if you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it enables me to make quick decisions. I'm very efficient and I can connect well with others. But the not so, the darker side of being this Enneagram is that I really do. I depend on what other people are saying. I really like that validation. I have trouble resting. So, do you have any advice for me and other Enneagram threes on like how we can use our performance tendencies in a good way?
Sure. And I think maybe in a moment would be helpful, maybe just to even run through a one sentence description of all nine types.
I didn't want to. If you could do that, that would be great. And I'm like, I know we have a certain amount of time together, but let's do that. Let's start there. I
Great. And
love it.
then when the time comes, we'll circle back to threes, which you are, and then we'll unpack it.
Well, I'm just being selfish, Ian. Like I'm like, let's just make this a
well,
free
uh,
session. Yes, let's
well,
go
I
through.
told you
Let's
I'm
go
a
through one through
therapist. I'm
nine.
happy to talk about you for the next hour, but it will cost you cost you $200.
Okay. Yeah, noted. Noted. Let's go through one
All
through
right.
nine. Thank
So
you.
ones are called the improvers. We used to call them the perfectionists, but they didn't like that term because it just sounded so negative out of the gate. So when I changed it to the improvers, if I had a nickel for every improver that thanked me, I'd be Jeff Bezos, I think, at this point. Um, so ones are called the improvers. Their unconscious motivation, and that's a very important term, as I mentioned earlier, is this compulsive need to perfect themselves, others, and the world. Okay, because they see a world that is just full of errors and mistakes and disorder that requires ordering, right? Twos are called the helpers, warm, supportive, generous, kind. They have a need to be liked. I mean, really, if you get down to it with twos, they have a need to be liked. The way that the strategy they use to win that validation and approval from other people is through meeting the needs of others. Okay.
Oh.
Threes are called the performers, and now we're into your neighborhood. Um, Productivity minded, goal oriented. Nobody loves a to do list like a three. Nobody wants to win more than a three, right? Uh, and really, what are threes looking for? Threes are fundamentally hungry for an experience of being valuable to others, right? And their strategy, though, is they have this compulsive need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs. Okay. Um, Fours are called the individualists. That's my neighborhood. That's my type. Fours are sometimes called the unicorns of the Enneagram. We think there are fewer fours than any other type in the world, which absolutely thrills the fours. Um, you, we really have this fundamental unconscious need to belong in a world in which we don't feel like we do. There's a disproportionate number of artists who are fours because they write out of this kind of melancholy and a sense of alienation in the world. Their need is to be special and unique because they think if I can just be different enough, people will finally let me come home from the Isle of Misfit Toys, and be part of the
Mm.
tribe. Fives are called the investigators, the most analytical, detached, at times, yeah, emotionally aloof of types. Um, these are people who have this compulsive need to gather information and facts and knowledge in order to fend off feelings of inadequacy and ineptitude. Sixes are
Mm.
called the loyalists. We think there are more of these than any other type in the world. These are people who are witty, fun, loyal, great team members. They have a need to feel safe and secure. That's the big unconscious motivation. They're also then worst case scenario thinkers who are always scanning the horizon, looking for what could go wrong in order to rehearse what they're going to do should the worst happen, which in the mind of the six probably is, right? In order to feel safe and secure in an unpredictable world. Sevens are called the enthusiasts. Um, Funny, great storytellers, people who bring the joy everywhere they go, energetic, great entrepreneurs. I could go on and on. I love sevens. I've got a son who's a seven. Um, but these are people who have this unconscious motivation. They have a need to avoid psychological and emotional pain. And the way they do it is by always looking to a future of unlimited possibilities, new escapades, and fun. It's like they do not want to deal with the hard stuff. They just want to stay in Neverland. Eights are called the challengers, blunt, uh, aggressive sometimes, big, larger than life personalities who have a need to um, mask, how do I say this? To assert strength and control over the environment and others in order to mask tender, vulnerable feelings, right? That part of them that's tender
Mm.
and vulnerable. Nines finally are called the peacemakers, easygoing, Hakuna Matata, go with the flow, don't rock the boat. But really, the shadow side of the nine is that they will merge with the opinions and the preferences and the opinions of other people in order to avoid creating conflict. They want to avoid conflict at all
Mm.
costs. Now, that's the nine types. However, I could write 100 pages on each of these types. So I just gave you a one sentence kind of
Yes.
place holding, you know, description of them.
And I believe that this placeholder will spark more interest in learning about, because as Ian was going through this, there might have been one
Mhm.
or two or maybe three that you're like, I could be this or I could be that. But truly, he gave just a couple sentences on each. If you go through and you take the test, where do you recommend people taking the test? I've heard this different
Yeah.
ways. And like, where does somebody go to
Well, the
take the
first thing I
test?
would tell people is do two things. Read that book, The Road Back to You. That's a shameless self-marketing moment, but I
But it's really
well,
good. It's
the
really
reason I
good.
think it's helpful is because it's a primer, it's an introduction. And other books on the Enneagram, which are also wonderful, tend to be 400 or 500 pages, and they can be very clinical and difficult to read, right?
Mm.
Um, I have a test on my website, Ian Cron or Ian Morgan Cron, IANMORGANCRON.com. It's called the IEQ 9, and at this moment I'm working on other things, but at the moment I would say it's the most accurate test with the most robust report available.
Thank you so much. And so, yeah, like as listeners are listening, it is an absolute shameless plug, but I don't bring anybody on the podcast that I have a vested interest in other than I'm consuming the content and really having an understanding, a deeper understanding of myself, things to be aware of in myself in relation to my husband, my partner,
Hmm.
my business partners, and my
Yes.
team. So, on that note, I want to tap on two separate questions here if we have the chance. Number 1, what do you say to somebody who doesn't like their number on the Enneagram or say, but I don't want to be a 9 or I don't like this. Or on the flip side of that, I had a friend who said, I asked my husband to take the Enneagram test and he insists he's a 3. She's like, he is so not a 3. Like, what do we do in those situations for people who don't want to be it or people who just don't, who classify themselves as something other than they're not?
Sure. Well, for people who resist it, sometimes I can actually tell their type on the basis of the fact that they resist it. There there are certain types, there are certain types who have the most trouble finding their way into it because they don't want to be labeled. Like fours who are special and unique are often like, I don't want to find out that there are other people like me. I want to believe that there's
Right.
no one like me.
Right.
Or, sixes can be a little fearful of being typed. I remember doing a corporate event once, and we had one person there that when we went around the room and asked for their type said, "Nope, I'm not telling you." And part of it was, I think, because they were fearful that if somebody knew their type, that they would use the information against them, which is a typical six kind of
Yeah.
response. Um, look, when people are ready, right? And I would also say that,
Mm.
look, uh, I think there was a Cornell study done a number of years ago. They looked at the lives of 72 high performing CEOs of companies from like 50 million to $5 billion. And they wanted to determine what characteristic in their psychological makeup could account for their success, right? Was there one? And here was the line from the study that blows my mind. The conclusion said the key predictor of success among leaders in business is self awareness. It wasn't grit. It wasn't determination. It wasn't strategic planning. It wasn't, charisma. It wasn't, forecasting the future. It was self-awareness. Now that's the gift of the Enneagram, is it gives you self-knowledge and self-awareness, right? Now I would go on to say that the key predictor of success in life is self-awareness, in your marriage, in your parenting, in your friendships with yourself, right? So when people kind of resist, I go, well, if you want to continue going on in the trance of autopilot, in which you continue to kind of make the same mistakes over and over again because you lack self awareness, feel free. I mean, that's certainly your right. For people who mistype, I often have to say to them, look, there's a number of reasons you can mistype, right? I could name you five off the top of my head. One of them I have to say to people all the time is you have to, um, you have to accept the fact that in the beginning, the Enneagram will tell you things about yourself you won't like, right? It's not Strengths
Mm.
Finder. Who doesn't want to take that test? You know what I'm saying? What a great name. It's like,
Right.
wow, I'll definitely take that test. But, the Enneagram in the beginning is not very flattering. I mean, it is going to reveal things about
Mhm.
you that are uncomfortable.
Mhm.
If you stick with it long
Mhm.
enough, you're going to realize that what's best about you is what's worst about you, and what's worst about you is what's best about you, and that's what the Enneagram is going to reveal. And you really can't grow as a human being without a little discomfort. There's just I don't know of any way to do it. Go to therapy, for crying out loud. I mean, it, people don't go to therapy because they're looking for fun. You're right. I mean, right?
Correct.
So, for people who mistype, I'm like, don't pick the type you'd like to be, own the type that you are, you know? And a
Mm.
lot of times people be like, I don't want to be that type, so I'm going to peg myself as a different one. And it's like, well, that's going to be a waste of time for a little bit. But, again, everyone's got a journey and I let them go on them.
And so one thing that you just highlighted that I really want to like hone in is that one of the highlights, one of the best things about Enneagram is an indicator or a tool to
Hmm.
self-awareness. And I feel like I have so much more awareness in that, but also awareness of
Yes.
others. And so so I feel like I have the permission and the freedom to speak about to the people who are closest to me, who I have improved relationships as a result of the Enneagram. My husband, I have mentioned, was a 2, and there are times when I can pause and say, like, I love you unconditionally, regardless of all the things that you're doing for me. I appreciate them, but I also don't need them. If I feel like he's going above and
Yes.
beyond, and I've noticed that in times of stress, he wants to do more to like establish the family, and I just need to pause there and just say, hey, like, we're okay, we're great. When it comes to my sister, it's important for me to tap in when she's avoiding like a conversation and avoiding an
Hmm.
emotion, because I realize she's over indexed for a future, and we're always living in the future. It has a hard time, we have a hard time coming back and addressing what's really going on in the
Yes.
present. So self-awareness and then awareness of others. Okay. So um, I want to know, what's your Enneagram and how does it affect your business?
So I'm a four. And
Yes, you
yeah,
did
and
say
and
that. You said
so
that.
being a therapist, I've been a professional songwriter, artist, write books. I've written a memoir. I've written a novel. So I don't just write self-help books. I have a very strong artistic side, and partly because when you grow up with this lie of an unconscious belief that you don't really have a place of belonging in the world, and you frequently lapse into this kind of space of melancholy and being a little too over focused on your own feelings, understanding those, kind of almost being addicted to your own feelings and suffering. You can write songs or write books that touch people's hearts, might make you miserable in the process, but will reach other people, right? Now, as I've gotten older and developed self awareness, I am no longer hostage to that unconscious motivation. Like I can observe myself,
Mm,
which is part of what self awareness is, in any given moment and say, you know, you're starting to buy that old story again, that you don't fit, that you don't belong, that you need to be special and unique. Do you really want to go there? Like, do you want to live inside a story that actually isn't true, that helped you as a little kid to understand trauma, experiences you were having? Relationships with other people, but now as an adult is hurting you? Like, you need to
mm,
throw away. Like, I love what Mo Willems, the children's author, said. He said one time, if you find yourself living in the wrong story, leave. And I think
mm,
people, one of the great things about the Enneagram is it reveals to us these stories that we've been telling ourselves. Like for example, it's a three. Threes tend to see a world in which people only value others for what they do and accomplish rather than for who they are inside. That sound true?
ugh,
Okay.
yes. Even though the lump in my throat would like to, counter
Okay,
that,
so
but
let's
yes,
let's
it's
just do a
true.
funny, let's just do an interesting exercise here. If I were to ask you to write a memoir about your life from childhood to now, and really kind of thinking more about childhood here, just off the top of your head, I don't want you to think too much. What would you name it?
I've thought about this for before. I would call it Flickers of Euphoria.
Wow, you do have a strong four wing. Um,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
okay, all right.
very strong
So
4 wing.
here's one. I don't want to mess with yours, but you know, I've asked that of threes a lot of times, and they would say something like "have to win." You know what I
Oh,
mean? Or it
yes,
would be like
yes,
proving myself or getting it done. You know what I mean? Or whatever. And I say to
yes,
him, okay, well, that
yes.
worked for you as a little kid. How's that story working for you now?
Mm,
Chances are getting it done or, you know, have to win. People who have to win are generally pretty miserable a lot of the time, right? They're constantly looking for approval,
mm,
validation. They're looking for success to be what defines them. If they don't succeed, then somehow or another, they're not worthy of love. Is that story working for you or for any three? No, you need to get free of that story. And the Enneagram can help you understand what the story is and bust out of it. It's not going to stop you from succeeding. You know, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in you over relying on a narrative that's just not true. You can be loved for who you are, not just for what you do or what you accomplish. Your husband can be loved just for who he is, not to the degree to which he helps people. Do you know what I'm saying? And as long as you're
100%.
hostage to that message, you're not living your best life.
Mm, so true. Speaking of living your best life, I'm a big proponent of being in service of others, specifically when it comes to the business world. And one of my favorite quotes of yours is, quote, "The Enneagram is a tool that awakens our compassion for people just as they are, not the people we wish they would become in our lives." So, as business owners, how can we use the Enneagram to be more compassionate to our customers and our clients?
Sure. So let's even back up. I mean, my corporate clients usually in the beginning have me come in to work with a senior management team with a with teams or divisions with inside of companies where there's a lot of inefficiencies because people don't understand each other, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
come in and I do an 8-hour workshop. You would think that I can just tell you, most corporate clients, they come in for the day and they're like, the people in the room are like, seriously, 8 hours? This is going to be horrible. They are, it's not because I'm a rocket scientist or terrifically talented. It's just the material is so great on its own. They just sit on their edge of their seats all day because they're going, that's my mother, that's my brother, that's the person in
Mm-hmm.
the cubicle next to
Yes.
me, that's the guy down the hall,
Yes.
that's my client, that's my customer. And they go, all the lights start going on and they're going, oh, that's why. It's not
Mm-hmm.
personal. It's not. This is about interior architecture, and so when they learn that, what arises is compassion, empathy, understanding, and once you start to have that in a culture, everything changes. And soft skills, I mean, just go on Harvard Business Review and look up importance of soft skills. You will catch a million articles, particularly recently, about the importance of these sorts of skills like compassion, empathy, understanding, kindness in the workplace. Who wants to go to a Shark Tank every day? Nobody wants to go to work in a Shark Tank every day, right? Or very few people. And so, you know, I have seen firsthand how understanding, get the ability to get your feet inside someone else's shoes and to see the world the way that they see the world is insanely powerful. And in corporate settings, business settings, nonprofit settings, I'll finish with this. Why do people leave companies? Well, retention problems tend to happen when one, people don't feel understood or valued for their contribution to the organization. That's usually number one, right? It's like my boss doesn't really see me or understand what value I bring to the table. I just feel like a cog, in this system. The Enneagram turns that all the way around. Inefficiencies in communication, right? People just, different types communicate differently. And when you understand these different communication styles, which I articulate in my workshops, people go like, oh, that's why that person withdraws when there's a conflict. Oh, that's why that person becomes aggressive in this situation, or this person can't stop, redoing other people's work because they're a perfectionist, or because, you know what I mean? And then you go, oh, now I can work with it, right? Tell you a quick anecdote if you don't mind. I was
Please, please.
working with a Fortune 500 company and did an Enneagram day. And I arrived back 6 months later to meet with the head of HR just as a follow up. And I walked down the hallway of this huge, you know, building in Manhattan. And this I couldn't figure out where this woman's office was because none of the suite numbers made sense. None of them in the hallway. It didn't go in sequence. I was like, what the heck, And she came out and she laughed and she said, those aren't the suite numbers, those are their Enneagram numbers. And I thought, so now when
Ah,
the three walks into a one's office or a one walks into a seven's office, they're reminded, okay, this person sees the world differently than I do. How
right.
can I, based on my knowledge of their type and my own type, how can I now walk into this conversation with self awareness and compassion and empathy, right? To, have effective, streamlined conversations that aren't, if they go sideways, I could probably, between the two of us, because we both know the Enneagram, get it back on track and even maybe laugh about the miscommunication or what's not
Mm.
happening. So again, um, proof's in the pudding. I've just seen it work so many times. Almost, if the, obviously if the organization really adopts it, um, I mean, I've just seen it work so beautifully and change cultures in so many different settings that I'd love to go out and teach it because it's like I know this is going to work. So, you know,
Okay, Ian. So what I heard, that people will bring you in to host these
hmm,
workshops. Now, a lot of our listeners are building out
yes.
teams. So if we can start now, how does it go when we're trying to build out a team, being cognizant? Like, how do we use Enneagram to build out a
Okay.
strong
Well, I would
team?
just say start by reading a book together. Just everybody reads the same book,
Mm,
right? A lot of beginning companies can't afford to bring in a workshop leader for a day, right? It's
right.
pricey.
Right.
Big companies can throw lots of money around. They just have personal development dollars, right? But but
Right.
you begin by reading a book, or you have the team take the IQ9 and sit down together and read the results, right? Become students not only of yourself but of each other. And then,
Mm,
during a monthly check-in, people are like, well, here's how I'm growing in self-awareness. Here's how it's helping me at work. If you got a two on your team, right? You should know as a leader of a company, you just don't ever want to put that person in a basement office where they're not around people all day long, right? Like
mm.
they're people. Like they just want to be around people all the time. They get energy from that. You got a five, that five wants to be in the basement office. They tend to be introverted. They get drained by too much interaction with people. I mean, they're phenomenal at their job. So again, you begin to develop these lenses and realize, like I tell leaders all the time of companies, like, or entrepreneurs. I work with entrepreneurs all the time. I'll say, look, the biggest mistake a leader can often make is to presume that their way of seeing the world is normal.
Mm,
because when you meet then somebody who sees the world differently than you do, you will judge them as abnormal. When if the Enneagram is right, which I think it is, there are 9 normals, right?
correct.
And so when a team
Correct.
gets a hold of this information, it's like the aperture kind of blows open and you go, "Oh, this is why so and so is not thriving. This it may be among other things, maybe a divorce and kid problems too, but this is why they're not thriving over here. This is why this person's humming along. When I go into a fives office, I know that I have to approach this conversation so differently than if I was in an eights office. When I'm doing a 360 on somebody, I can't tell a two the same things I tell a five in the same way anyway. Otherwise, it might crush them. They tend to be very, very sensitive to criticism and feeling devalued. So again, it makes for wise leaders and entrepreneurs and understanding clients. Oh my gosh, if your client's a bunch of coders, you better get ready to deal with them a lot differently than you are with hedge fund managers. So anyway, your typical type for hedge fund managers, let's say. So you know get a book, start there. That's probably take the IQ9 test on my website. That's probably the most cost efficient way of just getting started.
Well, as the leader of a newish growing team, I look forward to getting every team member the book, taking the I9, and then working on it together. I will say I'm very familiar with the Enneagram, and a couple of our team members are, and we play. We're a virtual team, so we have a series of games. And I had mentioned just again, this is my three, thinking that three is normal. And I said in Slack, no, I only play games I know I can win. And then Felicia, a member on her team says, "Hey, Jasmine, your three is showing. Be aware." I just loved that we were able to correspond in the language where I'm like, "You're right. Sometimes people play games for the fun of it."
Yeah.
What a novel idea.
Yes.
What a novel. So, just that knowing and understanding, Ian, for people who want to know more, I mean, if people want to know more, you have a membership, you have a website, you have books. What is going to be the place for them to connect with you and follow you even on places like Instagram? Tell us all the
Sure.
goods.
So across all my social channels, it's at Ian Morgan Cron, IANMORGANCRON. I always have to spell it because it's kind of an odd name. And obviously, my book, The Road Back to You, An Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery. They can go to my website, again, ianmorgancron.com, and they can learn about the IQ9. They can learn about my courses. They can learn about my new membership subscription for people who want to have more access and time with me that's more personal and direct than they can get otherwise. And like you, we have a growing, wonderful business, and it's wonderful to get up in the morning and feel like you're not only making a good living, but you're making a good difference in the world. So I'm grateful.
Mm, I couldn't have said it better. Ian, thank you so much for sharing so generously of your time. May your work and your energy seed only the best seed so that we can grow into a garden of goodness and have more self awareness of ourselves and others. I appreciate you. I hope you have a
Thanks
beautiful
for
day.
thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me on.